I want to welcome everybody to this video resource for faculty and staff, but especially faculty as we're developing diversity and inclusion statements for our syllabi and courses this fall. I am Pennylynn Dykstra-Pruim, the Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion at Calvin University, and I have one of my great colleagues joining me today.
I'm Chad Engbers from the English department.
And together we're just going to really briefly walk you through some key things to think about as you are preparing a diversity and inclusion statement to include in your syllabi and to be able to talk about that a little bit in that first week of class. I'm going to go ahead and share a short PowerPoint here so that we can talk about that and focus on that together. So one of the things that Chad and I have been talking about is actually why it is so important to do this right now. And I know Chad is very passionate about this. I don't know if you want to jump in there and talk a little bit about why it's so important.
Well, I think because we're Christians is the first reason for that. I value all of my students. I think that each of my students, no matter where they come from, is made in the image of God. And a lot of times they're treated like they're not, and they need to be in my classroom. So it's important for me because the God who loves me does not really allow me to pick and choose whom I love. And I think that's the most fundamental reason for me. It's not because I'm woke, and it's not because I'm concerned about political correctness, but it's part and parcel of my faith. And then the other reason is that I'm a teacher, and I teach literature where intersection of diverse voices and perspectives is really, really important. The more people you have reading a poem, the more that poem means, and the more different those perspectives, the better. So because I'm a Christian teacher, it's really important to have this in the classroom. And of course, the events this summer have only highlighted a lot of the challenges that we as a society face to all of those good things. So I think now is the time to really start addressing them in the classroom.
I definitely think this current moment should really be the impetus. If we haven't already drafted a diversity inclusion statement and don't already include that now is a really moment to do that. I think it's super important in this moment to really signal and message a diversity, our commitment to diversity and inclusive excellence at our university. So with that, I know that Chad, you and I have been talking about this, that there are some kind of key tips and considerations that can help us as we're thinking, well, how do I draft this kind of statement? And we have a handout that will be made available to faculty to help them. But we kind of centered in on these 6 tips and key considerations as we're drafting a diversity inclusion statement. And I know you have a favorite one that you wanted to highlight.
Well, I think make it sincere is I think that's a first priority in any kind of writing, but especially something like this. You don't want your statement to sound like you've copied and pasted it from some administrator's email that got sent around. We need to signal that this is real, this is live, this is important, and that I myself, Chad Engbers, stand behind this. So I try to write my syllabus in my own voice and try to write this statement in my own voice. You don't want it sounding like some lawyer wrote it in a cubicle. And I guess if your own voice is that of a lawyer in a cubicle, you've got problems that aren't the subject of this conversation. But I think making it sincere is really important. You don't want your students to read your statement and get the sense that you're faking it. Not on the first day. That a professor is saying things that she doesn't mean. I mean, that's exactly the wrong ethos for a professor to start off with, and it really minimizes this issue. So I think there are a lot of things that go into making it sincere, but I think that should definitely be a priority. If you don't mean it, don't say it. Write it, look at it, make sure that you can show students that you mean what you say.
I really like that encouragement to make it sincere. And I think another thing one of the ones that I wanted to highlight here is sort of this casting of vision. So that's sort of the big 30,000 foot thing. What do I want my classroom, this learning environment to look and feel like for all the different people in there. And one thing that can help us maybe, if I can just touch on a third one, is clarifying some responsibilities to say, you as students in this class also are co-creators of this learning space with me. So let's be mutually respectful and let's together create this space, right? You hold me accountable and I'll hold you accountable. So I think that those are some of the things that we can really focus on as we're drafting those diversity and inclusion statements.
Absolutely.
We put together a handout, which will be made available to faculty soon. But on there, we also talk about just some questions to consider. So as you sit down and think, okay, I'm going to spend a few minutes now, I'm going to write a draft, a diversity and inclusion statement for my syllabus. And these are just some questions, and like the first and the fourth one are kind of big ones that we're not going to touch on in this short video, but we wanted to say a few things about the ones in the middle. Do you want to take it there?
Sure. I mean, the second box down asks, what are one or two specific ways in which a genuinely inclusive environment will improve student learning in this class? And I think for a lot of us, that's a really hard question. And it gets back to sincerity a little bit. It's pretty easy to just copy and paste a boilerplate statement about the importance of diversity. But to sit down and write a few sentences to say what this actually means in the specific discipline, I mean, that's a really good exercise, not only to make students more welcome, but then also to think about your first commitments and your priorities and what your discipline is actually like. So I think the more you can write, the more you can think that through, the more sincere your statement will be. And I think the more of us that do that, the better we're serving students. If they see an inclusiveness statement in my literature class that's a little bit different from the one they would see in a German class or a psychology class, then they're getting a whole different range of ways to talk about this. And they're seeing that this is really an important thing across the disciplines at Calvin University.
Yeah, I wanted to touch a little bit on that third box too. How will breaches of civility and mutual respect be handled? I think it can be a really important part of a statement too, to include something about that, about how we're going to hold each other mutually accountable for creating this inclusive learning space together where all the different voices are respected, but then also to indicate somewhere in there kind of how you yourself are open to feedback, and that we should all be open to feedback, and again, to create that inclusive learning space that values the diverse voices that are in it.
That's a really important thing. I think language of diversity and inclusiveness, it can get a little bit dreamy and utopian. We're all made in the image of God. Isn't it wonderful when we're all together? But we all know, and we've all seen, that in reality, it's not that way. And part of responsibility is addressing the ways in which it's not that way. And we need to do that in our classes.
And actually, I've seen your sample diversity and inclusion statement, and I really appreciated it, how you really invited people to give you feedback and then gave them some concrete ways to do that. And so I want to encourage people again to access the resource where you can see sample diversity and inclusion statements from both Chad and from myself. So that's another reason to go to that resource afterwards. One of the things that I really appreciated about you, Chad, is that you have really thought about this and thought, oh, so I'm going to include this new kind of powerful, personal, meaningful statement about diversity and inclusion on my syllabus. What possible reactions could students have? And they're not exactly the ones we might think about right away, but you've really thought about this, and I'd love you to share some of your thoughts on this.
Well, I teach written rhetoric, and the first thing I say is you've always got to think about your audience. And that wasn't the first thing I thought about here. But when I did sit down and think about it, I thought, well, I'm envisioning a statement that will make minority culture students feel more comfortable in my classroom. But then I realized the very fact that they're minority culture students means that they're not the largest percentage of students who will actually read that statement on the first couple of days. There will be people who read that from the majority culture who haven't yet realized their own privilege, who think this is all about political correctness, who assumes that I'm faking it because this is current and this is what people are doing now. There will be students who hopefully are looking for language to talk about these things, but haven't been able to come up with it themselves. And hopefully they'll say, oh, this is a time and place when we can talk about this, and this is how we can do it. But I think pondering how the statement is going to read to majority culture students is every bit as important as thinking about how welcome it will make the minority culture students feel.
And I think it's really important too to think about that spectrum, as you said, the spectrum of reactions, but still kind of to come back to why this is so important for us today.
Right.
So I'm going to stop sharing a minute and just let us conclude with a couple kind of notes of encouragement. I think it's really important in this moment for our faculty to do something. And this is a small step that we can all do to help message and signal to students that diversity is really valued at our institution and that we are trying to be inclusive and to embody inclusive excellence.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's exactly right. And I think that for a lot of us, it might be new, it might be a little bit uncomfortable, but I hope we're at the point where we realize that our discomfort is okay. And in fact, if we're going to improve things, our discomfort is probably something that's going to happen. In my inclusion statement, I open the door to corrections about things that I say that reveal biases that I have. I'm not particularly looking forward to those conversations. And I haven't had this kind of statement on my syllabus before because I've been so uncomfortable with it. And I think what changed for me this year was not that I've suddenly become comfortable with it, but that I've accepted my discomfort as a necessary part of our progress going forward. So yeah, if it feels a little weird, if it feels a little bit strange, those aren't reasons not to do it. Those are reasons to do it. Those are reasons to go forward because that's part of the process.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Penny.
Resource, and we look forward to continuing conversations with our colleagues as we all try to do diversity and inclusion and to message our commitment to diversity and inclusion at Calvin University. Thanks so much.